Welcome to Ali Fitness Podcast, a weekly production all about bringing health into fitness. So, known as many things, but I guess as a strength coach, a nutritionist, a blogger, a podcaster, an author, Steph Gaudreau helps women get stronger. So I don't just mean physically stronger, but Steph is one of the pioneers in this movement of making women stronger. That's mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Today, we're going to talk to her about her recent Women's Strength Summit and ask her about issues that women are dealing with today. So, Steph, firstly, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, firstly, can you take us through your life journey with regards to fitness and health? I know you've had an interesting journey, and just to get a bit of more of an understanding of how you became a leader in this field.
Sure. Yeah, I'll try to give you the slightly condensed version because sometimes I can ramble on a bit. But, I grew up with a pretty normal, lower middle class childhood, have 3 siblings. I was the oldest child of the family. And, sort of relevant to this conversation, sports and athletics has really been something that's been in my life since I was pretty young. I remember my mom signed us up for soccer. My sister and I wanted to play soccer, and this is about probably age 8 or so. And I just loved it so much. And we were also doing dance class as well. And if you've ever seen pictures of me, I'm not the most lithe, sort of graceful person. I'm just built kind of like a truck. So my mom, after a while of doing soccer and dance, she sort of gave my sister and I an ultimatum, which was, you need to choose which one to do. And so I chose soccer and my sister chose dance. I'm sure mom would have loved us to have both chose the same thing, but we didn't. So sports continued to be something that I always loved. And I think that's just physical expression and using my body to feel capable and strong is just always something that's been woven into who I am. So I think that's important to mention. I think also relevant to mention, because this will come up again later on, is pretty early on, about age 10 forward, I just did not feel great in my body. I had a ton of digestive problems. I had problems around the time of my period, and I got mine early. I was 10 and a half. And I got really sick and no one knew why. And it was just I remember very vividly going to the doctor. I think I was about 11, and the doctor was like, "It's just hormones. You'll grow out of it." And I mentioned that because I sort of stopped learning to listen to trust my body. I stopped listening to my body. You know what I mean? When you feel so bad and a doctor tells you it's fine, there's nothing wrong, you're going to grow out of it. And you're just like, all right, well, that's just how it is. So I think that was another relevant piece. When I was 33, I was actually diagnosed with endometriosis. So that is the sort of an issue that I've been dealing with since I was quite young. And when I was in my 30s, I found sort of this paleo diet and this way of eating, and managing my lifestyle through the things that I do today has really helped me out with that. But, predictably growing up, again, like I said, I'm built like a tank, and I always have been. And, as soon as I stopped playing sports when I was in high school and I went to college, I gained a lot of weight, and I tried every diet that there is. I mean, you name it, Weight Watchers, vegetarianism, cabbage soup diet, all sorts of fitness things just to try to lose weight. And so I went on this really long quest to just constantly lose weight. And I was never happy. I was never light enough. I was never small enough. I was always on this pursuit of molding my body into something that it wasn't. And I think that's another sort of important piece that's relevant to what we'll talk about today. So professional life, I became a high school science teacher and went to school for biology and human physiology. So I've always had this love of science and how the body works, and taught high school science for 12 years. And in about 2011, started to feel like I wasn't in the right spot professionally. And it's scary when you've invested a dozen years or 10 years at that point into a career and an advanced degree, and, you've have tenure. And I had a lot of reasons why I could stay and continue teaching. But in 2010, actually in 2009, friends of mine who I was racing bikes with. So this is another part of my story. I used to race mountain bikes for about 8 years, and I was super into it. And we were talking about bikes before we started recording, and we could probably do a whole show about that. But friends of mine said, we're doing this thing called the Paleo diet, and you don't eat grain and you don't eat dairy and you know, all these things. And I was like, that sounds crazy. But I got kind of interested, and I read a book called The Paleo Diet for Athletes, which is by Dr. Lauren Cordain and Joe Friel. And from the endurance world, I knew of Joe Friel's name, and I was like, well, if Joe Friel put his name in this book, it must be legit. So I started eating a paleo diet in early 2010, and within a few months, like all of these symptoms and things I was dealing with started to feel a lot better. I used to have a lot of digestive issues. My energy would be super low throughout the day. I would actually leave work every day and get a Coke Zero and a package of M&Ms from the local convenience store to just like make it home without falling asleep. So I had some caffeine and sugar in my body. And that's the way I lived for a really long time. But within a couple months of changing my diet, I really started to feel so much better. And it wasn't like an overnight thing. It took a few months really to start feeling these changes. But once I realized that the way I'd always accepted was how I was going to feel, like there was another way, and it was a better way for me. And so that's really when I started to share recipes on my biking blog, which I had a long time ago. And after about a year and a half, a friend said to me, you know, like you're posting a lot of recipes, you should start a food blog. And I thought, all right, I guess so. So I started Stupid Easy Paleo, and it was nothing more than a place for me to put my recipes so I could share them with my friends and my family. And that was it. It was just for fun. But after I started to feel like my professional career wasn't going so well, and it wasn't really what I was looking for, those two things happened at about the same time, the fall of 2011. So, a lot of people think, oh, well, you just had this really successful website and you must have just quit your job. And I was like, no, because Stupid Easy Paleo was about a month or two old at that point. It was in its complete infancy. It wasn't even a thing, really. And so it took about a year and a half to continue blogging, to think, I actually really like this. And people are asking me for help. Like they're wondering, how could they do this in their life? And I'm able to help them. So yeah, after about a year and a half, I asked for a leave from my job and left the classroom and embarked on this wonderful ride of entrepreneurship, which has been 4 years now, working for myself and figuring it all out. But, those early days were really scary because I did get a leave of absence from my job. They said, you can come back in a year if you want. That's great. But by the way, you don't get any pay while you're gone, and you don't get any benefits while you're gone. So basically it was sort of out on my butt, and, had some savings, and I was like, sink or swim, Steph. You have to do this. Like, if you want this, you have to work really hard. And, so that's really how it all started. But there's so many relevant pieces of the story that are in there. But, I think it's just always been, I've always loved to teach people and help people with things. And it's just in my nature. So while I think my permanent home wasn't a secondary education classroom, I feel like what I do every day is very much help people learn how to do this in their own lives. So it's really fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. And what I'm really interested in, Steph, is something that you said which just resonated with me, and it sounds like such a common scenario, and that is you tried all different diets. And that's interesting in itself. And then another comment that you made was that you were never happy with your body.
Yeah.
When, if at any stage, did that change for you?
Yeah, so that's a big part of the story that I left out, except I figured we'd talk about it. But, when I was mountain biking, and I started mountain biking in about 2003, it was just a new thing. And I just really liked being outside and seeing what I could do. And once I got more into the sport, and I moved out west, moved to Arizona and then to San Diego, and began to race and compete. it became pretty obvious to me that someone of my body type, and at the time I probably weighed 60 kilos, maybe 58, 60 kilos. But I still was like, wow, you're really big compared to these long, lean, tall, thin, cyclists. And what's valued in the cycling community is power to weight ratio. Can you be very powerful and push yourself up a hill on your bike and be really light while you're doing it? Right. And I just looked around at all the people I raced against and the people on my team and just thought, I am like the fattest thing I have ever seen. And, I think part of it goes back to my stepdad, and he would occasionally make comments about my body and be like, oh, you're chubby, or you're like the fat one. And, and that's how I remember it. My mom swears like that never really happened in that way. But whether it was teasing or not, I internalized that very young as there was something wrong with my body. And my sister, who's very close in age with me, she's about a year and a half younger. She's the total opposite body type. She's like 5'8". She's, sort of lean and lanky. And I'm, like I said, the exact opposite of that. And it just became part of my story that I told myself for a really long time. Like, remember when stepdad was mean to me about this? Like, remember when kids teased me in school about being chubby? Okay, like now I'm mountain biking and I'm way bigger than all the other girls. Like my shorts don't fit. I have to get bigger shorts. And it just became a narrative for me. And so again, my pursuit was always to get really small. And I remember when I transitioned into triathlons, I did a season of Xterra racing, which is off-road tri. And I got even smaller because I was just training so much. And I actually lost a lot of muscle mass from what I had. And I remember seeing a photo of myself at Lake Tahoe in Northern California and seeing this photo of me and actually thinking in my head, wow, look at how gross you look. Like look at your legs. Like, oh, I just couldn't believe it. And that was the lowest weight that I was ever at. I was probably about 58 kilos at that point. And I just remember weighing myself after I got back from that race. And I was like, wow, it was like the lowest weight I remembered being as an adult, really. And just thinking, this still sucks, still not happy. And then it was only a couple months later, a friend of mine dared me to try this thing called CrossFit in my garage. It wasn't at a gym. It was just in your garage, do some air squats and some push-ups and run to the fire hydrant and come back. And that was about it. It was some sit-ups. And I just was like, wow, this is really fun. It was totally different from mountain biking. And I was really deep into the endurance world at that point. So I was racing 12-hour races and 8-hour, 6-hour races, just out on the bike for long periods of time. And this was like short and fun and punchy. And I really liked it. And then I joined a CrossFit gym. And for the first time, like I actually got instruction in how to strength train. And it didn't take long for me to realize that I liked feeling stronger, that I liked the feeling of not caring anymore how small I was. Like I could focus on how strong I was and what I could do, like what was I capable of. And, that I remember the first time I did a pull up because I always thought I'll never be strong enough to do that. And this is a really common narrative and story with a lot of women. Like, I'll never be strong enough to do a pull up. I'm never going to be strong enough to climb a rope. I'll never be going to be strong enough to do a half marathon, like whatever the story is, but like, I'll never be strong enough to do whatever. And I just remember gradually hitting these milestones as I was getting stronger and just thinking, what else could I do? And it was such a pivotal thing for me. Again, it wasn't one particular event. Like it wasn't, the pull-up was definitely an exciting one, but I think that's really when it started to click for me, was that I wanted to focus on what I was capable of doing without fighting my body. Because,
and in a sense, it sounds like you were sort of realizing that your body was actually helping you now.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there are people who have a really healthy relationship with cycling. And I don't want to make it seem like it's a bad sport and it's at the root cause of all of my problems. Not at all. But for me, again, I was on that quest to like control my body and get it to a place where it probably naturally doesn't want to be.
Stephanie,
And yeah.
on that note, did you have a number or a picture in mind that you sort of thought, when I get to that, I'll be happy?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was 125 pounds. Which for who knows, like I probably hadn't weighed that since I was a teenager, 14 maybe. And I think the lowest I got to was about 58 kilos. So that's, I think 128, somewhere around there, 127. So I never even got to the number. And I love that you asked that question because I ask people that all the time. I'm like, when did you decide this was the weight you were supposed to be? When someone told you, or when you remember how much you weighed when you were 12? Like, where'd you get that number from? But yeah, it was a really messed up way of looking at.
Absolutely. And it's funny because if we went back to when you were 14 and you were 125 or whatever it was, I'm sure you wouldn't have been happy. I'm sure you would have had the same issues.
Yeah, it's funny when I tell people I started doing CrossFit and whatnot back in 2010, they're like, oh, so you must have lost a bunch of weight. And I was like, no, I actually gained weight because I gained muscle. I got stronger. I got healthier. Like my relationship with exercise changed. My self-belief changed. And I weigh 30 pounds more than I did when I first walked into that gym, and a lot of people are like, oh my God, they can't believe it. And I know there's actually a really interesting other phenomenon that happens with a lot of women when they start strength training. And sometimes they do gain muscle because they've been very depleted, like I was, and very weak. And, they'll oftentimes gain weight because they've gained muscle, even though all these other dimensions of their health and wellness have skyrocketed and gotten so much better. And their life is so much better. And they're like, but the number on the scale went up. And so there's still an aspect, even in this like health conscious strength community, of helping women navigate those body image issues. Because again, we want to pin so much on the scale and the number and how much we weigh. And, you could get down to your lowest weight and be completely unhealthy in so many different ways. I was totally unhealthy in a lot of ways. And so I feel like, your body's going to find its sort of natural settling point. And that's just, the less time you spend fighting it, I think the happier life is going to be overall.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting transition. And it leads me to my next question, which I sort of want to jump straight into a blog that you recently wrote about a direct attack on you, really. So just for our audience out there who may not have read the blog, what was actually said to you and how did that make you feel?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I was on Instagram and I posted a photo of me doing a pull-up, and the comments were all very, supportive and like, yeah, that's awesome and whatever. And then there was one negative comment that was like, basically, to paraphrase, like, you have cellulite, you're overweight, this is unhealthy. How can you promote this? Essentially, you're trying to act like a guy so that you can feel better about yourself and like be strong, and that you look weird. And it was just a bunch of negative stuff like that about me. And my first, it was interesting because I remember a time in my life where that would have absolutely ruined my mental and emotional state. Like, send me into a tailspin where I would question everything about myself and my self-worth and my life and be in a really bad spot. At that moment, though, when I read that comment, I got really defensive for the women out there and the girls out there who are like me when I, would have gone into a tailspin, because they're not at that point in their journey yet. Like, they're going to read that comment and they're going to be like, oh, I kind of look like Steph. Oh, now, okay, I suck too. Like, I'm horrible. I'm, overweight. I have cellulite. I'm fat. Like, they would just, So I kind of got mad because I was like, not everybody is emotionally strong enough to deal with stuff like comments like that. And the fact that social media and the internet and blogs and whatever you can be more anonymous now and be really hateful. And it really makes me upset because I'm like, I remember being that girl who that comment would have crushed. And it's not okay. And so I wrote this blog post about it was just kind of a stream of thought. I actually got off the computer and I went and just started writing. And a couple hours later had this blog post and sort of talked about some of these different issues that women and men, frankly, because I've had a bunch of men reach out to me that they also struggle with body image and body shaming. Is that, look, I mean, we can only be responsible for ourselves. Like, I can't control other people, but what I would challenge myself to do as well as other people is be aware of this hyper obsession that we have with other people's bodies. First of all, why are we so obsessed with the whole, making it just talking about other people and their bodies and what their bodies look like. And what is that distracting me from doing if I'm spending a lot of time indulging in commenting about other people and gossiping and whatever, consuming trash magazines and all that stuff. So I think, yes, there's a huge problem. And I think we also have to realize that if we expect there to be change, if we just get online and we say, oh, I'm so mad, there's so many trolls. These trolls are terrible. They're all terrible people. I think we're kind of missing an opportunity to say, wait a minute, could other people be kinder? Sure, but good luck trying to make them be, because it's not going to happen. That's not a good use of your energy. So what can you do? And how do you choose to spend your time? And are you getting offline and spending time with the people in your life, or are you just being a keyboard warrior? And so that was really kind of the gist. And then there was some other stuff there too about sort of this double standard that we place on women, especially as women. We're like, don't be too aggressive, because then you're a bitch, but don't be a doormat and be too meek and inferior. Don't be too pretty, but if you don't try hard enough, then there's something wrong with you in the beauty department. You know what I mean? So like women, like being strong, like don't be too strong, but don't be too skinny either. And so I think there's this huge, huge, huge double standard, even in the fitness industry, as somebody who talks about fitness and writes about it. And there's certainly other examples, but, I think this is true in this industry as well. Because, first of all, we see every male fitness dude has their shirt off and is like, can you see I have 8 abs? Okay, like that means I'm credible. And then at the same time, if somebody doesn't look the part, you're like, well, you don't look like you know what you're doing. And why am I going to take advice and coaching from someone who doesn't take care of themselves? So it's like people can't win. You're either too vain or you don't try hard enough. And it's just a really hard space to navigate. So I guess my call to action for people was just like, realize what you're doing, realize what you're saying. Words do matter. Your words, you might be joking, but that might be really hurtful to someone else. And so it all starts with you. Me, I say you meaning me, but like it starts with me as well. And there are things that I work on too, and I try to be aware of. And I'm like, I could have been kinder, or wow, I didn't realize I was like judging her in my mind. I was like thinking about like, oh, this person's body. It's such a strange space and time that we're in, and I think, I don't have all the solutions, but I was glad to be able to bring some of these things up and have people talk about them. And I heard from moms who shared this with their daughters and friends that talked about it. And I'm just glad people are more interested in talking about these issues, because it gets harder and harder all the time to navigate.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I've heard a few podcasts recently with this social media sort of badgering. And as you mentioned, obviously it's much easier to belittle someone over an email or a Facebook page where you're anonymous. But What's really interesting, I think, is, well, I guess it's twofold. One, you're getting all these messages and you might get 1 million people telling you how good you are. And then all it takes is one message, one negative message. I mean, you even said you had so many positive messages about those pull-ups. And then there was just this one message. And it sort of overwrites all those other positive messages. And it's interesting how we look at that.
I mean, we're human beings are, as biological creatures, are designed to and wired to seek pleasure and avoid pain, and so anything that's painful sticks out in our mind. My friend Courtney Olson, she has this great little exercise she does with people where she'll give them 5 compliments and then she'll diss them on something. And she's like, well, what did you remember? The thing that I said that was negative, right? And so I think it's a great exercise that you can do. And it's interesting. I'm glad you asked that question because there's definitely an aspect of social media, which is like seeking validation and seeking praise. And I think it's important to mention that while I appreciate, I'm very appreciative. I have such a supportive community overall. I mean, the number of rude comments I get is very small. I usually deal with them and just delete them right away because I'm like, I don't have time for that in my life. I don't have time to deal with this troll. But there's a flip side to that too, which is I have to know that I am good and worthy and lovable and loving and valuable without the positive comments too. Does that make sense? There's a flip side to that. Your worth, if your worth is based on people either giving you compliments and praise or the absence of negativity, then that's still a big area that someone has to do some work on. And it's great to get support. It's wonderful. I love everybody who is in my community and I'm so grateful for them because without them, there wouldn't be really a Stupid Easy Paleo. There wouldn't be me doing what I do. But, it also applies to lifting as well. And this is something somebody sort of brought up to me one time and I was like, you're right. So for me, if strength building and being strong is what I use to validate my own self-worth, then what if that goes away? What if I have a horrible accident and I can't ever lift a barbell again? Or what if my life changes and it's not a priority? And I think that's something that in this community, again, this is stuff I think about all the time as well. I'm not I have it all figured out, but it does bring up these moments of self-reflection. If I have a bad day in the gym and I get all pissed off about it and I feel really bad and I'm like, wait a minute, how much of my self-worth am I hitching to my performance in the gym? Or how much of my self-worth am I attaching to my weight loss? Or how much of my self-worth am I making connected to my success in my job or whatever it is? I think there's a bigger sort of discussion that has to happen as well. Looking for those moments where you're like, okay, I'm on social media. I'm just seeking validation. I think that's as damaging sometimes as just hoping you don't get negative comments.
Yeah. So that brings me to my next point, really, which is what you're all about. And that is being a strong woman. So what's your definition of strong?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of people assume I'm going to say being able to squat a certain amount or being able to complete a certain type of event or whatever it is. And really, my idea of strength is actually resiliency. Can you be a highly resilient individual? Because bad things are going to happen to everybody. We're going to have injuries. We're going to have tragedies in our lives. It's just part of being a human being. But can we weather those really tough things and come back around when the dust has settled and say to ourselves, what did we learn from that? What did I learn about myself? How can I grow as a person because of this adversity and this challenge? And so when I picture someone who's strong, I think of someone who allows themselves to be a human being and hurt and cry and get upset and feel pain and yet it doesn't break them. They eventually whatever processing you need for something that's gone on in your life, like you get back on the horse and you pay credence to the fact that, so, if you think of like strength and weakness or dark and light, or I don't know, any kind of opposite scenario in our world, like this is a very kind of meta discussion, but if you think about any characteristic, there's usually an opposite. And it's through acknowledging the fact that we all have a side, that we all have weaknesses, we all have dark parts of our human personality and who we are, and we all have struggles, but we all also have triumphs. Like it's the darkness and the struggle that also sort of defines what the opposite is. And through those things, we can learn and know that the opposite also exists in our capacity, really. So I know that if I have these things about my personality that are just not the best, they're not the best qualities, but I also know that I have the capacity for the opposite of that. And that's what I want to focus on. I don't try to believe that like we should all only be hoping that we're ever going to be kind and generous and this and that. Like that's great, but that's not how we work as people. So it's through experiencing weakness and yet rising above that and coming back around. It's through experiencing the dark times that we can strive for the light times. We can work toward the good things. Like, I think we have to acknowledge that. We have to understand that building resilient people doesn't mean that we suppress the things about ourselves that we want to change. It means acknowledging that it's that and then working to improve those opposites. So I don't know. I think it's an answer that a lot of people don't expect me to say. But.
Well, I expected that because the Women's Strength Summit that you have founded, which is an amazing, amazing event, and I'd like you to tell us just a bit about that. But that to me is the, strength in its wholeness, because you deal with strong women from all aspects of life and all modalities of life. And so can you just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So in 2015, I had this idea that I wanted to do an online event. And at first it was going to be the Women's Strength Training Summit. And I sat down to plan out this event and brainstorm some topics. And the longer I thought about it, I would write down things about physical strength. And then I kept adding things to the list that were not physical strength related. It was all the other stuff, mental and emotional and spiritual. It was everything. Because to me, and when I look at my life, I'm like, I can't just be physically strong and expect to feel like a whole person who is using the best of my potential at that moment, so I just couldn't shake this idea that it had to be a multifaceted type of event, and it had to cover strength of mind and body and spirit. And so that's what I ended up with. And the first one I did was in 2016, and we had 35 speakers, all female. And then in 2017, so just in May, we had 24 speakers, all female as well. And we talk about, I look out in the summit space and I see, I know a lot of people have bad impressions about summits and like they're shady and, well, it's just like trying to get my email address and whatever and sell me some stuff. And that stuff certainly happens. But I really sort of promised myself that it had to be an event that like nobody was expecting, in terms of the fact that the speakers really, these are women who are leading their communities and doing these things. Like it had to be really good. I was like, it has to be good. It can't be bad. We've got a lot of bad summits out there, and I didn't want to lead with the easy sell either. I know, like weight loss and six packs, and I'm not saying it's wrong to want that stuff, but that's the hook that everybody's using. And I'm like, we have more than enough information on that stuff. I mean, man, what about the other stuff that women want to know about?
Absolutely.
Like how do you talk to your teenage daughter about issues about being a woman? I mean, or if you have, this obviously sort of a throwback to my career, but like if I'm a teacher, I'm a coach, I see something going on with one of my adolescent girls, like how do I talk to them? Or, talking to women about birth control and what it does to our bodies and menopause. And I'm like, we need to talk about these issues. Like women know that they can go online right now and find 50 articles about how to get abs, but it's the stuff that is deeper that I think women are really craving, that advice from women they can trust, from trusted sources, from people they know that are going to actually support them. And
Absolutely.
so that's the goal of the event, is to really bring together women around the world who maybe they can't afford to travel to an in-person event or a conference, and it's not something they can access. So to bring that access to everyone, as long as they have a computer or a smartphone.
So, Steph, how do our audience tap into the Women's Strength Summit? Obviously, it was in May, so we may have missed it. And I'm sure there'll be another one next year. But just to get in touch with the amazing women that you had speaking in...
You can still go to the site. So the site is still live. It's womensstrengthsummit.com. And if you sign up, I will send you the playbook. So you can still get the playbook, which is a description of every speaker and what her talk was about. So if you're like, yeah, I really want to know how to get off hormonal birth control, but I don't want to wait for another summit, like you can track down the women in the summit who talked about that and find them online, because they're doing this stuff in their communities. And then I also, in that book, I have 17 strength building tips that you can start using right now. So you can still, get a little taste of that stuff. And we talked about this a bit earlier, but we're working on a way to make it available long term. So it's just something we have to deal with the technicalities of at the moment. But you can still, send you the strength building playbook. And if there's an issue that you're like, I need this right now, look up that woman. And she's got a website and lots of great free resources that are talking about that very thing.
Great.
Yeah.
So what from the summit, and also just from your own general observations, what trends do you see emerging in fitness and health and nutrition and strength? And
definitely more of a personalized nutrition track, like people realizing, and again, I'm sort of like preaching to the choir here, but like there are a subset of people who've been hanging around the real food, ancestral health, sort of clean eating community, paleo, primal, who are like, I need to find a way to eat that's going to be sustainable for me for long term. And lots of these diets and protocols, while they do, some of them have a therapeutic reason for existing, some of them have just sort of general guidelines and rules that were made up by a person who created it. But I think a lot of people who've been in this community for a while know that they have to find a way to eat that works for them and that it's sustainable. And there's still other trends that keep popping up, and it's always going to be like the next greatest thing, like now it's the ketogenic diet, which is not a new diet whatsoever, but for some reason, capitalism being what it is, people are like, oh, there's a huge market here that I could tap into and make products that are for this particular way of eating. And I mean, we've seen that come and go throughout the years, right? It was like Atkins diet and paleo diet and whatever. So I think you're always going to see these trends popping up, but I think a lot of people are starting to realize they have to customize their own nutrition and do the work that it takes to do that. You've got to listen to your body and think about what your goals are and trial and error. Like there's an amount of work that has to be done if you're going to find a way that you can eat for the rest of your life that makes you feel amazing, that doesn't chain you to a calculator and a food scale, and allows you to enjoy the fun things about life.
And Steph,
there has to be a middle ground.
What you're saying makes absolute logical sense, but how do you make that work? You say customize it, make it work for you, listen to how you feel, make it sustainable. What do I do today?
Yeah, I would say the first step would be to look up intuitive eating and what that means. And, I think there's there is a valid reason why some people may want to get familiar with what portion sizes look like. But I would say, first of all, like the first thing you can do right now today would just be to include more nutritious stuff in your day. I think people get on a diet and they're like, oh man, today sucked. I had to get rid of everything I like, eat a bunch of food I don't like. And by the way, I have to try to do this forever. Like that doesn't sound very motivating. So for a lot of people, I really advocate a very gradual approach to nutrition and diet change and like what I'm going to eat. And there are certain people who can do the rip off the Band-Aid and like cold turkey, tomorrow we're doing this. It's not the majority of people that I work with. Most of them do better with a slow, gradual approach. So one of the things you can do is make a healthy swap. So for example, instead of, I don't know, white rice, if you're dealing with some like body fat issues and metabolic problems, like if you have really bad energy levels and stuff, like let's take you off some white rice and give you some cauliflower rice. Bonus, like it's an added vegetable. You aren't really swapping, you're not taking something away. You're just adding something in. Another simple thing would be add a vegetable to your plate, add another one. It's like little stuff. If you drink soda, swap it for sparkling water and lemon, or make a fancy spa water with cucumber and mint, like do something little, but make just little changes. And the most important thing I say to do today is like, don't force yourself to eat things. This is related to diet. Don't force yourself to eat things that you find absolutely unpalatable and you hate. Because you're not going to research shows that people who are the most successful with healthy eating in general are the ones that eat things that they like the taste of, and there's certainly an adjustment there. But if you're used to eating really hyper palatable food because it's been highly processed and all sorts of sugars and stuff like that, there is going to be an adjustment where you're like, I'm eating plain strawberries and they don't taste like anything. They're not sweet enough. But your body is really smart. And if you, like a lot of people that eat a lot of processed food, they get used to things tasting saltier and sweeter and fattier and more umami. It's all like, it's been added to the food and it's not how sort of food naturally tastes. So there is an adjustment, but your body's super smart. And if you just like make some of those simple changes, I think you'd be surprised how fast your taste buds can come around. But, add a little here, add a little there, see what you can swap out. I really love that approach because you don't feel like you're denying yourself. I actually know a lot of people who, when they start eating healthy, they or healthier, they sort of are like, I don't have any energy. And when I look at what they're eating, I'm like, you took all this stuff away. You took away like everything you were eating and you didn't add anything back.
I like that. I like how you point out to add things. People just think it's all about taking away, but absolutely adding nutrition. I love it. And we'll actually put a link in the notes to the Paleo Athlete, your book about a beginner's guide to real food for performance, because I think a lot of our athletes could benefit from reading something like that. And Steph, I want to ask your advice on what would you recommend for both young women before they have children and then women as we age? Just a number one, maybe it's health, fitness related sort of advice.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would emphasize the importance of eating enough protein in your diet. And that one isn't one that people often think of. They're usually like, she's going to say to cut out all my carbs, or I should eat less fat, or I should drink more water and whatever. And I think when you look at nutrition and you look at what human beings need in the day, and by the way, in the US, we have something called the RDA, which is the recommended daily allowance of these vitamins and minerals and macronutrients. And people think that the recommended daily allowance, which for someone my size, and I weigh about 70 kilos, so your listeners can understand, I weigh about 70 kilos, and the RDA for somebody about my size is about 55 to 60 grams of protein, which is not a lot. It's very, very low. for somebody my body size. And you can find this calculation online. But the problem is that we have a lot of people who repeat the RDA as the ideal amount of protein that one should eat in a day. And it's actually the complete opposite. It's like the bare minimum that you need to survive and do your bodily functions. Like it's basement level. And so I think this has been repeated long enough where people think that the RDA is the amount that you should shoot for. And barring any kind of existing kidney condition that you're getting treated with your, medical practitioner on, I think most women of all ages are severely under eating protein. And the reason that's important is like, if you picture a seesaw, I don't know what you call it where you live.
Seesaw.
Right. Yep. In the middle is protein. It's the leverage point around which the seesaw can go up or down or stay even. And the two ends of the seesaw are carbohydrates and fats, right? So you can be low carb, high fat, or low fat, high carb, or more balanced. But the protein in the middle, the protein requirements don't change all that much. And certainly as we age and we become less active, generally we need fewer calories overall, right? There's obviously that. If we're sedentary or we're extremely active, we need, different requirements. But I think many women struggle with cravings. They struggle with appetite. They're always hungry. They never feel satisfied. That's a huge gap in what I see for a lot of women. So if fat loss is your goal and you're very low on protein, that's the first thing that I recommend people actually gradually increase. And,
like your analogy of the seesaw too. I haven't heard that before, but I really like that.
It makes a lot of sense, right? If you're if you're a highly active person and let's say you're a competitive athlete, you're probably going to eat. And again, there are exceptions to this rule. I understand that somebody's going to write in and go, but I know somebody who fuels all their stuff on fats. Like most people are going to do better on a slightly higher carbohydrate, lower fat approach if they're extremely active. So runners, like you just imagine someone who has an active job. The opposite would be, if you're very sedentary, you don't need an excess of carbohydrates. So you're going to tend to be a little bit higher fat and a little bit lower carb, right? Which is fine. It's great if you're not doing much activity. But what I see, again, a lot of women is they don't eat much in the morning and they don't eat much at lunch because they're trying to be good. And I'm using air quotes if you could see me. They're trying to be good, right? They're trying to diet. So they're eating very little at breakfast and very little at lunch. And then they get home and they have these unreal cravings for everything that they know they shouldn't eat. But now their willpower is very low because they've just spent it all trying to eat good and eat as little as possible, right? And then in the evening, you can't control yourself. And it's a biological thing. You're just responding. Your brain is sending signals to your body, and your hormones are saying, hey, I need to eat more. And so one of the easiest things to do is like in the morning, have a good dose of protein because it also helps to make serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. It's important for mood, right? And that is made into melatonin so you can sleep at night. And when you eat enough protein in the morning, you actually, there are many studies that demonstrate this, and you can anecdotal evidence, right? You just eat you think about on the weekend, you sit down and you're like, I'm going to have some eggs and some bacon or sausage. And you have like a good breakfast and you're not starving in 2 hours. But for some reason, we don't make that connection, right? That has to happen every day. So there are lots of studies that demonstrate that people who eat more protein in the morning have fewer problems with appetite as the day goes on.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Yeah. And Steph, I'm excited to ask you my secret question because you may not know what it is, but I've seen a few interesting pictures of you. And my next question is, do you have a tattoo?
I have many tattoos. Yes, several. I've had to count them. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. I have 6 tattoos.
Well, can you tell us about one of them?
Yeah. I'll tell you about my latest one is I got a Valkyrie tattooed on my leg. Valkyrie is from Norse mythology. It is a female figure who comes down to the battlefield and takes men's souls up to Valhalla. And they're usually pictured with spears and axes and stuff like that, which I just think is really cool and strong. So yeah, my latest tattoo is a Valkyrie with a big, like an axe with a pointy thing at the end. And she's just there because I think she's badass. So that's my latest one.
Excellent. It sort of goes with your podcast, Harder to Kill.
Yeah. Harder to Kill Radio, building unbreakable humans. Like, let's just be as strong and resilient as we can. I think that's a great goal.
I love it. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time and your inspiration in general for getting women stronger. I love it.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's been fun.
Excellent. And hopefully we'll hear more about what's coming soon on your website.
Absolutely. That's the best place to stay tuned.
Great. We'll link to all of those in the show notes.
Thanks.
Thank you. For all the resources and show notes from today's episode, please go to www.ali.fitness. If you liked today's episode, please show your appreciation by going to iTunes, give us a 5-star review and subscribe.